I was asked during intermission by several people, who did all the research for this little history lesson today? Well, Jim Gibson, the president of the band, writes all the scripts, and he just really outdid himself. Through all these decades. Well, the next decade, the 60s, was the age of youth. 70 million from the post-war baby boom became teenagers and young adults. By now, the population of the United States had risen to 178 million, and the average salary was $4,700 a year. It was a decade of triumph and tragedy. In many ways, a decade that some of us would have loved to have skipped. Some of us did skip. Alan Shepard became the first American in space in 1961. John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth in 1963. And by 1969, we had realized John Kennedy's ambition of placing a man on the moon in that decade. But the young President Kennedy created a Peace Corps and ushered in the era of Camelot. But his tragic assassination in November of 1963 marked the closing of a period of innocence. Broadway was dominated by musicals, including Camelot, Hello Dolly, Oliver, Man of La Mancha, more on that later, Funny Girl, and the rock musical Hair. Popular movies were The Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, 101 Dalmatians, and Pinocchio. Movies became more political, such as the commentary on the arms race in Dr. Strangelove, Midnight Cowboy, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and The Graduate pushed the boundaries of the time. 6 James Bond movies, including Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, were enormously popular. Television offered a primetime cartoon called The Flintstones. Popular sitcoms were The Andy Griffith Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, The Addams Family, I Dream of Jeannie, Star Trek, and The Twilight Zone. Humor took a new twist in the late 60s with Rowan and Martin's Laughing. Teens from coast to coast watched American Bandstand. Chubby Checker introduced a twist, and a new craze was born. Dancing became an individual activity, as the mashed potato, the swing, the Watusi, the monkey, and the jerk soon followed. You remember those, don't you? Each dance lasted for just a song or two before the next one came along. Go-go girls on stages or in bird cages danced above the crowd. Elvis returned from the Army to resume his career and joined a rich music scene with Bobby Darin, Neil Sedaka, Jerry Lee Lewis, Paul Anka, and Frankie Avalon. But the nation's fabric was torn apart with Vietnam, race riots, and a counterculture of drugs and free love. In addition to John Kennedy's assassination, his brother Bobby and Dr. Martin Luther King were both gunned down in 1968. Motown came on the scene and introduced Gladys Knight and the Pips, the Supremes, and Aretha Franklin, Smokey Robinson, James Brown, and the Temptations. The music scene changed through the decade to reflect the new social environment. A folk music revival with Joan Baez, Peter, Paul and Mary, and Bob Dylan led the way, and the Beach Boys developed the surf sound. Acid rock and psychedelic rock gained prominence, and the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead grew out of the counterculture in 1967. Woodstock was in 1969. But early in the decade, the Beatles burst on the scene, and the resultant British invasion changed music forever. One of the greatest groups to come out of the British invasion was the Rolling Stones. Montrose Community Band celebrates the 60s with a medley of Rolling Stone hits called The Rolling Stones on Tour.